The year was 1878, and at Dead Man's Lake in Wyoming, 70 people gathered to watch Clara Brennan drown. She wore a wedding dress, stones tied to her ankles. Her own father stood silent in the crowd. They called her a witch. But 50 yards away on the ridge overlooking that cursed water, a cowboy sat atop a black stallion. He did not know her name, had never spoken a word to her, but in the next 30 seconds he would ride down that slope, dive into the lake, and say 3 words that would change everything. "She is my wife." This is their story. The year was 1878, and at Dead Man's Lake in Wyoming, the people of Serenity Springs gathered to watch a 26-year-old woman drown. She wore a wedding dress. Her father stood among the crowd hat in his hands, saying nothing. The entire town believed she was a witch who had killed her betrothed with dark magic. But 50 yards away on the ridge overlooking that cursed water, a cowboy sat atop a black stallion watching. He did not know the girl, had never spoken a word to her, but in the next 30 seconds he would do something that would change both their lives forever. This is the story of Clara Brennan, the girl they called a witch, until a cowboy said, "She is my wife." 3 weeks before that morning at the lake, Clara Brennan lived a life so small it could fit inside a single room. The room was in her father's house on the edge of Serenity Springs, a weathered cabin that leaned slightly to the left, as if trying to escape the weight of too many failures. The house had belonged to her grandfather, then her father, and someday she supposed it would belong to no one at all. Clara was 26 years old. This was considered old for an unmarried woman in 1878, old enough that the townspeople whispered when she passed old enough that mothers pulled their daughters close and said, "See what happens when you wait too long." But Clara had not been waiting. She had been surviving. Her father, Tobias Brennan, was 52 and looked 70. Once he had been a blacksmith, strong-armed and proud, the kind of man who could bend iron with his hands and still have gentleness left over for his daughter. But that man had died 5 years ago, the same night his wife Mary died of consumption, coughing blood into a rag until there was no more breath left in her body. The man who remained was a hollow thing filled with whiskey. Tobias owed $600 to Thaddeus Morgan, the wealthiest man in Serenity Springs, owner of the general store and half the buildings on Main Street. Morgan was 55 years old, fat in the way that rich men get fat, with red cheeks and small eyes that never seemed to blink. He had offered Tobias a bargain: "Marry your daughter to me, and the debt disappears." Clara had not been asked. She had been told. On a Tuesday morning her father had sat her down at the table, the same table where her mother used to knead bread, and he had said, "You will marry Thaddeus Morgan on Sunday." Clara had looked at her father's hands, those hands that used to lift her onto his shoulders, and she had seen them trembling. She had smelled the whiskey on his breath, even though it was not yet noon. She had wanted to scream. She had wanted to run. But where would she go? A woman alone in 1878. Wyoming had 2 choices, marriage or ruin. So she had nodded. She had said, "Yes, Papa." And she had folded that scream up inside herself where it could not be heard. What no one knew, not even Tobias himself, was that the 40 acres of dry, cracked earth he owned held a secret. Beneath the dust and dying grass lay an underground aquifer, the largest source of fresh water in the entire territory. It was invisible, untouchable, but it was there, waiting. Thaddeus Morgan knew. He had paid a geological surveyor $200 for a map that showed the water flowing beneath the Brennan property like an underground river. He had calculated that controlling that water meant controlling the entire valley, every farm, every ranch, every desperate soul who needed a drink for their cattle or their children. But Morgan had not counted on having a weak heart. He had not counted on dying. 2 months before Clara was meant to marry Thaddeus Morgan, a stranger arrived in Serenity Springs. He called himself Reverend Ezekiel Thorne, and he came riding into town on a mule dressed in black from his hat to his boots, carrying a Bible that looked like it had been dropped in a river and left to dry in the sun. Thorne was 42 years old, tall and gaunt, with skin so pale it seemed translucent, as if you could see the bones beneath. His eyes were black, not brown, but black, the kind of black that swallows light and gives nothing back. When he smiled, which was often, his teeth were too white, too perfect, like a predator showing its fangs. He built a church in 3 days. It was a small thing, rough timber and a crooked steeple, but it had a cross on top, and that was enough. People came because they were scared. The drought had lasted 6 months. The wells were running dry. The crops were dying. The cattle were thin. And when people are scared, they look for reasons, for explanations, for someone to blame. Reverend Thorne gave them what they wanted. On his first Sunday, he stood before a congregation of 30 frightened souls, and he spoke in a voice that rang like a hammer on an anvil. "The land is cursed," he said. "God has withdrawn his blessing because of sin, the sin of barrenness, the sin of women who cannot bear children, the sin of empty wombs that poison the earth itself." He opened his Bible and read from the Old Testament, his finger stabbing at passages that spoke of barren women as cursed as withered fig trees, as vessels of God's wrath. The people listened. They nodded. They looked at each other and wondered, who among us is barren? Who among us has brought this drought upon our heads? Thorne did not point fingers. Not yet. He let the fear grow. He let it spread like mold in a damp cellar, quiet and insidious, until everyone in Serenity Springs was looking at their neighbors with suspicion. But Ezekiel Thorne had not always been a reverend. His real name was Ezekiel Cross, and 3 years earlier he had been a miner in Kansas, a man with calloused hands, and a daughter named Sarah. Sarah had been 10 years old when the drought came to Kansas. For 6 weeks there had been no rain. The wells ran dry. The river became a trickle, then a memory. Sarah grew thin. Her lips cracked. Her eyes sank into her face. And one morning she could not get out of bed. Ezekiel had held his daughter in his arms as she died. She had looked up at him with those sunken eyes, and she had whispered, "Papa, why will God not give us water?" And Ezekiel had no answer. He had prayed. He had begged. He had offered his own life in exchange. But God had not answered. Sarah had died in his arms, her small body, light as a bird, her last breath a sigh that sounded like a question. After that, Ezekiel Cross had stopped being a miner. He had opened the Bible, and he had read until his eyes bled. He had searched for an answer, for a reason for someone to blame. And he had found it, in Deuteronomy, in Leviticus, in passages that spoke of barren women as cursed. He had decided that Sarah had died because of sin. Not his sin. The sin of women. Women who could not bear children. Women whose empty wombs had angered God so much that he had withheld the rain. Ezekiel Cross had become Reverend Ezekiel Thorne, and he had set out to find the barren women and make them pay. Serenity Springs was his 3rd town. In the first 2 women had been accused, shamed, driven out. One had hanged herself. Thorne had moved on before anyone could ask too many questions. Now he was here in this dying town, and he could feel it in his bones. There was a witch here, a barren woman whose sin was poisoning the land. He just had to find her. 60 miles east of Serenity Springs, in a valley where the grass still grew green because a river ran through it. Samuel Blackwood woke at 4:30 in the morning. This was not unusual. Samuel Blackwood had been waking at 4:30 every morning for 22 years, ever since the night his parents died. He was 35 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a calf and hands scarred from a lifetime of work. His face was weathered tanned, dark by the sun, with a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight when he was 19. He wore a brown Stetson hat that had belonged to his father, a leather vest over a cotton shirt boots that came up to his knees, and a gun belt with a Colt .45 revolver that he cleaned every night before bed. Samuel Blackwood owned the Blackwood Ranch, 15,000 acres of prime grazing land, 200 head of longhorn cattle, 30 horses, and 40 men who would follow him into hell if he asked. He had built it all himself, starting with nothing but the land his parents had died on, and a rage so deep it could have drilled wells. Every morning Samuel followed the same routine. He dressed in the dark. He walked to the stable and saddled Midnight, his black stallion, a horse he had raised from a foal 8 years ago. He rode out to the northern pasture to check the cattle, counting heads, looking for injuries, watching for predators. He rode to the southern fence line to check for breaks. He stopped at the bunkhouse to speak with Elijah Hayes, his foreman, the man who had saved his life when he was 12 years old. Elijah was 55, a black man with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much. He had been born a slave in Mississippi, had escaped north during the war, had lost his daughter when she was 10 years old, sold away before the emancipation, never seen again. He and his wife Martha had been wandering when they met Samuel, a 12-year-old boy standing in the ashes of his parents' farm, holding a shovel like a weapon. Elijah had asked Boy, "Where are your people?" And Samuel had said, "They are dead." And Elijah had said, "Then you will come with us." That had been 23 years ago. Now Elijah was foreman of the Blackwood Ranch, and Martha cooked for the men and kept the house, and they were the closest thing to family Samuel had. On this particular morning, Samuel rode back to the ranch house just as the sun was breaking over the mountains. He dismounted, handed Midnight's reins to one of the hands, and walked up the porch steps. Martha was waiting for him with coffee, black and strong the way he liked it. "Morning," Martha said. "Morning. Elijah says we lost 2 head last night. Wolves looks like." Samuel drank his coffee. "We will track them after breakfast." Martha studied him. There was something in her face, a question she wanted to ask but did not. Samuel had learned to read that look. It meant she was worried. It meant she thought he was lonely. It meant she wanted him to find a wife, settle down, fill this big house with children instead of silence. He ignored the look. He had tried marriage once, 10 years ago. Her name had been Catherine Wells, daughter of a territorial politician, beautiful and educated, and entirely unsuited for ranch life. They had been engaged for 6 months. She had called it off 1 week before the wedding when she discovered that Samuel had invested every penny he had into expanding the ranch, that he was for the moment broke. She had married a banker in Denver 3 months later. Samuel had rebuilt. It had taken 5 years, but he had come back stronger, richer, more powerful, and he had never let anyone close again. After breakfast, Samuel was in the barn shoeing a horse when one of his men came running. "Boss," the man said, breathless. "News from town. Thaddeus Morgan is dead." Samuel looked up. Morgan owned the general store in Serenity Springs. More importantly, Morgan owed Samuel $400 for a herd of cattle purchased on credit 6 months ago. When? 3 days ago. Heart attack, they say. Dropped dead at the church during his wedding rehearsal. Samuel set down the horseshoe. Who was he marrying? Some girl. Brennan, I think. Daughter of old Tobias, the drunk blacksmith. Samuel knew Tobias Brennan. Not well, but he knew the type. A man hollowed out by grief and whiskey, a man who had sold his daughter to pay his debts. Samuel felt a flicker of disgust, then pushed it aside. It was not his business. What mattered was the money. If Morgan was dead, who would pay the debt? Where is the girl now? The man shifted uncomfortably. That is the other thing, boss. They are calling her a witch, saying she killed Morgan with dark magic. Reverend Thorne, that new preacher, he is working folks up. They are talking about a trial. Samuel frowned. A trial for witchcraft. In 1878. It was absurd. But he had seen absurd things before. Fear made people stupid. Grief made them cruel. And a town full of scared, grieving people could do terrible things. He thought about the $400. Then he thought about the girl, whoever she was, standing in front of a mob. He thought about his mother screaming in the flames while people stood outside and did nothing. "When is the trial?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning, at the lake." Samuel nodded slowly. "Saddle 6 horses. We ride at dawn." The man blinked. "Boss." "You heard me. But why? It is not our business." Samuel looked at him. His eyes were cold. $400 makes it my business. Now go." The man left. Samuel returned to his work, hammering the horseshoe into shape with sharp, precise strikes. But in his mind he was already planning. He was thinking about the lake, about the girl, about what it would take to stop a mob. He did not know why he cared. He told himself it was about the money. But somewhere deep down in a place he did not like to examine, he knew it was more than that. It was about the night his parents died. It was about standing in the yard 12 years old, watching the barn burn, hearing his mother scream, and not one person in town lifting a finger to help because his father had made enemies, because people were scared, because it was easier to look away. Samuel Blackwood had sworn he would never look away again. The wedding rehearsal had taken place on a Thursday afternoon. Clara had stood in the church wearing her mother's old wedding dress, a white satin gown that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. It was too big for her. Her mother had been a larger woman, softer, with hips made for childbearing. Clara had to pin it at the waist and the shoulders, and even then it hung loose. Thaddeus Morgan had stood beside her sweating despite the cool air, his collar too tight around his thick neck. The Reverend Ezekiel Thorne had been reading from the Book of Common Prayer, his voice rising and falling like a saw through wood. "Do you, Thaddeus Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Morgan had opened his mouth to answer, and then his face had gone red. His eyes had bulged. He had made a sound like a cat being stepped on a high strangled wheeze, and he had collapsed forward, hitting the wooden floor with a sound like a sack of grain being dropped. For a moment no one moved. Everyone stared. Clara had stared too, her mind blank with shock. Then someone screamed. People rushed forward. Dr. Edwin Porter, the town physician, had pushed through the crowd, knelt beside Morgan, pressed his fingers to the man's neck, then his wrist, then his chest. After a long moment, Porter had looked up and shaken his head. "He is gone. Heart attack." The man was 55, overweight, ate nothing but pork fat and beans. It is a wonder he lasted this long. That should have been the end of it. A tragic death, yes, but a natural one. Except Reverend Thorne had stepped forward, his black eyes gleaming, and he had pointed one long finger at Clara. "No," the Reverend had said. This was not natural. This was judgment. The crowd had gone silent. Dr. Porter had frowned. Judgment. Thorne had turned to face the congregation, his voice rising. "This woman is 26 years old and has never borne a child. She is barren. And the Lord says that the barren woman is a curse upon the land. Her sin has spread from her womb into the earth itself. That is why the wells are dry. That is why the crops fail. And now the Lord has struck down the man who would have married her, because even God will not allow such a union." Lies, Clara had whispered, but her voice was too small. No one heard. Dr. Porter had stood. "Reverend, with respect, that is superstition. The man died of heart disease." Thorne had smiled. His teeth were very white. "You are a man of science, doctor. But science cannot explain why the wells went dry the very week this woman was meant to marry. Science cannot explain why Thaddeus Morgan, who had survived 55 years, should drop dead the moment he tried to bind himself to a barren witch." "She is not a witch," Dr. Porter had said, but his voice was uncertain now. People were murmuring. Heads were turning to look at Clara, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Thorne had raised his Bible. "We must test her. The Word of God provides a way. We will take her to the lake. We will bind her and lower her into the water. If she sinks, she is innocent, and the Lord will receive her soul. If she floats, she is a witch, and we must burn her alive to cleanse the land." The murmuring had grown louder. Clara had looked around wildly for help. She had seen Mrs. Patterson, her old schoolteacher, a kind woman who had taught her letters when she was 7. Their eyes met. Mrs. Patterson had looked away. She had seen Tommy Wilson, a boy she had tutored in reading just last year, a sweet boy who could not master the letter R, no matter how hard they practiced. Tommy was 20 now, tall and strong, and he was nodding along with Thorne's words. She had looked for her father. Tobias Brennan was standing at the back of the church, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Papa," Clara had called. "Papa, please." Tobias had not moved, had not looked up, had not said a word, and Clara had understood in that moment that she was alone. They had taken her that night. 6 men, including Tommy Wilson, had come to her father's house and dragged her from her bed. They had locked her in the church storage room, a small windowless space that smelled of candle wax and mildew. She had spent the night on the floor, her hands tied, listening to the sound of her own breathing. In the early hours before dawn, she had heard voices outside. She pressed her ear to the door and listened. "The judge will pay when the girl is dead," a man's voice said. She recognized it. Reverend Thorne. Another voice, deeper, unfamiliar. "And the land will revert to the bank. We can purchase it for a fraction of its worth." Precisely. The aquifer beneath Brennan's property is worth a fortune. Control the water, control the valley. But we needed the girl dead before the marriage. A widow has rights. A dead unmarried woman has none. What if Blackwood interferes? He was asking about the debt Morgan owed him. Blackwood will not come. He is a businessman. He will write off the loss and move on. And if he does come, well, accidents happen. The voices moved away. Clara sat back, her heart pounding. They had planned this. Morgan's death had been convenient, yes, but if he had lived, they would have found another way. They wanted her dead, not because she was a witch, because she owned land with water beneath it. She thought about telling someone, but who would believe her Thorne was a man of God? The town trusted him. She was just a girl, an unmarried girl, a girl with no mother and a father who would not speak for her. She closed her eyes and waited for morning. Dawn came cold and gray. They pulled Clara from the storage room and loaded her onto a wagon. She was still wearing the wedding dress, now stained with dirt and sweat and the dried blood from where her fingernails had torn trying to untie the ropes. The wagon rolled through town toward Dead Man's Lake, and people came out of their houses to watch. Clara saw faces she had known her entire life. Mr. Henderson, who ran the feed store, who used to give her peppermint candies when she was small. Miss Alice, the seamstress, who had altered her mother's wedding dress just 3 days ago. The Carter family with their 4 children Clara had taught to read. They all watched. Some looked sad. Most looked afraid. None of them helped. At the lake, the crowd had grown to more than 70 people. They stood in a semicircle around the water, silent, waiting. Reverend Thorne stood at the edge of the wooden dock, dressed in black, his Bible in his hands. Clara was pulled from the wagon. The ropes around her wrists had rubbed the skin raw. Her hands were numb. They dragged her toward the dock, and she could see the water, dark and still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. Thorne raised his Bible. "Clara Brennan, you are accused of witchcraft, of murder, by dark arts, of cursing the land with your barren womb. Do you confess?" Clara's voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. "I am innocent. I have hurt no one." Thorne smiled. "The water will be your judge. If you are innocent, you will sink, and the Lord will take your soul. If you are a witch, you will float, and we will burn you until nothing remains but ash." He gestured. 2 men came forward, one of them Tommy Wilson. Tommy knelt at Clara's feet, avoiding her eyes, and began tying a canvas sack filled with rocks to her ankles. The weight was immediate dragging at her legs, pulling her down even before they pushed her into the water. "Tommy," Clara said softly. "Tommy, do you remember when I taught you to read? You could not get the letter R. We practiced for weeks. You were so proud when you finally got it right." Tommy's hands were shaking. "I am sorry, Miss Clara. I am sorry." "Then do not do this. Please." A hand fell on Tommy's shoulder. Thorne was standing over them both. "He has to," the Reverend said, "or his family will be next." Tommy tied the last knot. He stood wiping his eyes. Clara looked out at the crowd one more time. She saw her father standing at the very back, hat in his hands, shoulders hunched. She thought of all the times he had protected her when she was small. The time he killed a rattlesnake in the barn with a shovel, not hesitating, putting himself between her and danger. The time he carried her home when she twisted her ankle 2 miles through a thunderstorm, singing to her so she would not be scared. That man was gone. In his place was a coward. "Papa," Clara called. Her voice carried across the water. "I forgive you, but God will not." Thorne backhanded her across the face. The force of it snapped her head to the side, sent stars exploding across her vision. "You dare speak of God, witch?" The doctor said he had a weak heart. The doctor has been corrupted by your influence. Cast her in. Hands grabbed her arms. Clara screamed. She thrashed, kicked, fought with everything she had. No, please, I did not do anything. I am innocent. Please, someone help me, anyone. No one moved. No one spoke. The hands lifted her. For one endless moment, Clara was suspended in the air, weightless, her ruined wedding dress billowing around her like wings. Then the water swallowed her whole. The cold was a fist closing around her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. The weight at her ankles dragged her down, down, down into the darkness. She kicked, but the rocks were too heavy. She pulled at the ropes around her wrists, but they held fast. The light above grew dimmer, smaller, until it was just a pinprick, a dying star. Her lungs burned. Her vision narrowed. She thought of her mother dying in bed, coughing blood, whispering, "I love you," with her last breath. She thought of the lavender smell in the wedding dress. She thought of the letter R, the way Tommy's face had lit up when he finally pronounced it correctly. This is how I die, Clara thought. Alone in the dark, wearing a wedding dress, killed by people I have known my whole life. She closed her eyes. And then she heard it. Even through the water, even through the roaring in her ears, she heard it. Hoofbeats, thundering closer, a man shouting, a gunshot cracking through the morning air. Then nothing but the cold and the dark, and the desperate animal need to breathe. 50 yards away, Samuel Blackwood sat atop Midnight watching the crowd throw a woman into the lake. He had arrived just moments before, had ridden up to the ridge overlooking the water, had seen the mob, the girl in the white dress, the preacher with his arms raised like some Old Testament prophet calling down fire. Samuel had seen enough. He spurred Midnight forward. The stallion lunged down the slope, hooves pounding against the dry earth. Behind him, Elijah and 4 other men followed, their rifles drawn. The crowd turned. Faces shifted from righteous fury to confusion to fear. Samuel did not slow. He rode straight through them, scattering people like leaves, and pulled Midnight to a halt at the edge of the dock. Thorne was standing there, arms still raised, face frozen in shock. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Who dares interrupt God's judgment?" Samuel drew his Colt and fired. The bullet passed 6 inches from Thorne's left ear. The Reverend staggered back, nearly falling. "Where is she?" Samuel asked. His voice was calm, cold, the voice of a man who had shot people before and would do it again without hesitation. Thorne pointed at the water with a trembling hand. "She is being judged by God's holy water." Samuel did not wait. He swung down from his horse, tore off his gun belt, and dove into the lake. The water was murky, thick with algae and silt. He could not see more than a few feet. He kicked downward, hands sweeping through the darkness, searching. His lungs began to burn. His eyes stung. He could not find her. No, he thought, not again. I will not watch someone drown while I do nothing. His hand brushed fabric. He grabbed it, pulled, found her waist, found the rope at her ankles. He drew his knife and cut the blades, sawing through the wet hemp strand by strand until the weight fell away. He wrapped his arms around her chest and kicked for the surface. They broke through together. Samuel gasped, dragging in air that tasted like heaven. The girl in his arms was limp, silent, her face pale as death. "Get back!" Elijah was roaring at the crowd, his rifle aimed at Thorne's head. "All of you get back now!" Samuel hauled her onto the bank. She was not breathing. Her lips were blue. He pressed on her ribs. "Breathe," he commanded. "Damn it, breathe." Nothing. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, covered her mouth with his, and forced air into her lungs. Once, twice, 3 times. She convulsed. Water erupted from her lips, and she curled onto her side, coughing, gagging, retching. Samuel sat back, his chest heaving. She was alive. Thank God she was alive. The girl opened her eyes. They were green, the color of new spring leaves, and they were filled with terror and confusion and something that might have been hope. "Easy," Samuel said. His voice was rougher than he intended. "You are safe now." The girl laughed. It was a broken, desperate sound. "Safe, mister, look around you." Samuel did. The crowd had regrouped. They were muttering, shifting, working themselves back into a fury. He could see it happening the way fear turned to anger, anger turned to violence. He had seen it before. Thorne stepped forward, composure returning. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume. Your reputation precedes you. But you cannot interfere with God's judgment. This woman is a witch. She killed Thaddeus Morgan with her dark arts. I just watched you try to drown an innocent woman. That is murder, Reverend, not God's judgment." "Murder. She has no protector," Thorne said. "No husband, no father willing to claim her. Under the moral laws of this community, she is subject to our judgment." Samuel looked down at the girl. She was still on the ground, shivering despite the heat, her wedding dress clinging to her body, her hair plastered to her face. She looked up at him with those green eyes, and he saw something there, something fierce and unbroken despite everything they had done to her. She was not giving up. Neither would he. "She does have a protector," Samuel said quietly. "I beg your pardon." Samuel reached down and took the girl's hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but they wrapped around his with surprising strength. "What is your name, Clara?" she whispered. "Clara Brennan." "Clara." He said it like he was testing it, seeing how it fit. "I am Samuel Blackwood. I own the largest ranch in this territory. I have 40 men who do what I say and enough money to buy this town twice over. And I am about to make you an offer." Clara's eyes searched his face. What kind of offer? Samuel kept his voice low, meant only for her. "Thaddeus Morgan owed me $400. He is dead, so that debt falls to his estate. But you were meant to marry him, which means you have a claim. More importantly, your father's land sits on top of the largest underground aquifer in Wyoming. Control that water, control this whole valley. Morgan knew it. Thorne knows it. That is why they want you dead." Clara's face went pale. "My land has water enough to supply every farm and ranch for 100 miles, worth a fortune, and right now you are the only heir." Samuel paused, then said the words that would change everything. "Marry me. Right here, right now. They cannot touch you if you are my wife. I get the water rights. You get to live. It is a fair trade." Clara stared at him. "You do not even know me. I know you are innocent. I know you are strong. I know that if you say no, they are going to throw you back in that lake, and this time I might not get to you in time." He squeezed her hand. "Marry me, Clara Brennan. Let me take you away from all of this." Clara looked at the crowd. She looked at her father, who still would not meet her eyes. She looked at Reverend Thorne, whose face was twisted with rage. Then she looked back at Samuel Blackwood, this stranger with storm-gray eyes and a scar down his face and a voice like gravel and smoke. "Yes," she said. Samuel turned to Thorne. "You heard the lady. Marry us." "I will not." "You will," Samuel said. "Or I will drag you to the federal marshal in Cheyenne and let him know what you have been doing here. Attempted murder is frowned upon even in the territories." Thorne looked at the gun on Samuel's hip. He looked at the hard-eyed men surrounding him. He looked at the crowd whose bloodlust was fading in the face of real power. "Fine," he spat. "But God will remember this blasphemy." "Let him," Samuel said. "I have a few words for him myself." The ceremony was brutal and devoid of any romance. Thorne mumbled the words like they were poison. Clara's voice shook when she said, "I do." Samuel's was steady as stone. "I pronounce you man and wife," Thorne said flatly. "Good," Samuel said. He scooped Clara up into his arms before she could protest. "Now we are leaving. You can send me any bills for debts. I will pay them every cent. But if any of you ever come near my wife again, I will burn this town to the ground." He carried Clara to his horse and lifted her onto the saddle. She swayed weak from the ordeal, but she did not fall. Samuel swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist. "Hold on," he murmured against her ear. "To what?" "To me." He spurred the horse, and they rode away from Serenity Springs, leaving behind the lake and the crowd and the ruined wedding dress floating on the dark water like a ghost. The ride lasted 3 hours. Clara did not speak for most of it. She could not. Every time she opened her mouth, she tasted lake water. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of her neighbors twisted with hatred. Every time she breathed, She felt the phantom weight of stones dragging her down. Samuel did not push her. He kept one arm around her waist, steady and warm, and he let her fall apart in silence. When her shivering became violent, he pulled a flask from his saddlebag. "Drink," he said. "Whiskey. It will help." Clara took it with numb fingers. The liquor burned going down, but the warmth spread through her chest like a small sun. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet." She turned her head slightly. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you do not know me, Clara. You do not know what kind of man I am, or what kind of life you are walking into. I know you pulled me out of that lake when everyone else was content to watch me drown. That is enough for now." Samuel made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You set the bar real low, Mrs. Blackwood." Mrs. Blackwood. The name hit her like a physical blow. She was married. She was somebody's wife, a stranger's wife. "This is real," she said quietly. "This is not some fever dream I am having at the bottom of that lake. It is real. And you really married me in front of God and everybody." "I did." Why, Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I told you already. Nobody deserves to die alone. That is not a reason to marry someone. Maybe I had other reasons." "Like what?" "Like the fact that your father's land sits on top of water worth more than gold. Like the fact that Thaddeus Morgan was going to use you and throw you away. I am offering you a partnership. You get my protection, my name, my resources. I get the water rights. We both get to live." Clara felt something hot and bitter rise in her throat. "You are no different than Morgan." Samuel's arm tightened around her waist. "I am very different than Morgan. He was going to use you and discard you. I am offering you a choice. You can leave whenever you want, but while you stay, you will be treated with respect." "And what about the other parts of marriage?" Samuel's breath was warm against her ear. "I will not touch you, Clara. Not unless you want me to. You will have your own rooms, your own space, your own life. I am not looking for a wife in the traditional sense." "Then what are you looking for?" "Someone to stand beside me. Someone who will not run when things get hard." He paused. "Someone who will fight." Clara thought about the lake. She thought about her father's silence and Thorne's cruelty and the whole town turning their backs on her. "I can fight," she said. "I know. I saw." They rode in silence after that. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. The landscape changed from scrub brush to grassland, from dry earth to green pastures. And then they crested a ridge, and Clara saw it. The Blackwood Ranch spread out below them like a painting. Green meadows stretched as far as the eye could see. A river wound through the center silver in the sunlight. Hundreds of cattle dotted the landscape, and in the middle of it all, rising from a gentle hill, was the biggest house Clara had ever seen. It was built of stone and timber 2 stories tall, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and a chimney rising from the center. There were barns and stables and a bunkhouse and gardens and corrals. It looked like a small town unto itself. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch," Samuel said. Clara could not speak. She had grown up in a 2-room cabin with a leaking roof and a father who drank away every penny. This was a different world entirely. How she finally managed. 22 years of work. Every day, every hour, every decision. Samuel's voice was flat factual. "My parents died when I was 12. I had nothing. Now I have this. I am sorry about your parents. It was a long time ago." They rode down into the valley. Ranch hands stopped their work to stare as they passed. Clara felt their eyes on her, measuring, judging. She was wearing a soaked wedding dress. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she was clinging to a man she had met an hour ago. "They are looking at me," she said. "You are wearing a wedding dress, and you are soaking wet. They are going to look. What are they going to think? They are going to think I have lost my mind." Samuel's voice held a hint of dark humor. They might be right. They reached the main house. Samuel dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground. He caught her without hesitation, his arms strong and steady. "Easy," he murmured. "I have got you. I can stand on my own. No, you cannot. And there is no shame in that." Before Clara could argue, the front door burst open and a woman came rushing down the steps. She was stout and gray-haired with a face like a thundercloud and hands that looked like they had worked for 60 years without stopping. "Samuel James Blackwood," the woman shouted. "What in the name of all that is holy have you done?" Martha Samuel's voice was calm. "This is Clara, my wife." Martha stopped dead in her tracks. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Your wife," she repeated. "Yes, the girl they were drowning in Serenity Springs. Yes." Martha looked at Clara. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. The ruined dress, the rope burns on her wrists, the bruise blooming on her cheek where Thorn had hit her. "Lord have mercy," Martha breathed. "You poor child." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her in days. "Get her inside," Martha ordered, already taking charge. "She needs a hot bath, clean clothes, and food. And you," she jabbed a finger at Samuel, "you need to explain yourself. Later. Samuel. Later. Now, Samuel." Something in his voice made Martha pause. She looked at Clara again, really looked, and whatever she saw made her expression soften. "All right," she said quietly. "Later. Come on, child. Let's get you warm." Martha led Clara inside. The house was even more impressive up close. Polished wood floors, high ceilings, a staircase that swept up to the second floor like something from a dream. Clara stumbled on the first step. Martha caught her arm. "When is the last time you ate, child? I do not remember." "When is the last time you slept? I do not remember that either." Martha made a sound of disgust. "Men. They never think about the practical things." She helped Clara up the stairs and into a bedroom at the end of the hall. It was bigger than Clara's entire cabin back home, with a 4-poster bed and a fireplace already crackling with warmth. Martha helped her out of the ruined wedding dress. Clara stood there in her undergarments, shivering, while Martha examined the rope burns on her wrists with gentle hands. "Those bastards," Martha muttered. "Those goddamned bastards." "The whole town," Clara said numbly. "Everyone I knew, they all wanted me dead. Not everyone. Samuel did not. Samuel wanted my land." Martha's hands stilled. "Is that what he told you?" "He was honest about it." Martha resumed her work, cleaning Clara's wounds with careful efficiency. "Samuel is always honest, sometimes too honest. But there is more to that man than land and cattle." "Like what?" "Like the fact that he has been alone for 22 years and never once let anyone get close. Like the fact that he dove into that lake without a second thought. Like the fact that he married you in front of God and everyone when he could have just paid off your father's debts and walked away." Clara frowned. "He could have done that? Of course he could have. Samuel Blackwood could buy half of Wyoming if he wanted to. He did not need to marry you to get that water." "Then why did he?" Martha looked at her with something like pity. "That is something you will have to figure out for yourself, child." A tub was brought in and filled with hot water. Clara sank into it with a moan of relief, watching the dirt and blood and lake water swirl away. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the memory of hands grabbing her, pushing her, dragging her toward death. It did not work. She was still in the tub when exhaustion finally pulled her under. Martha helped her out, dried her off, dressed her in a clean nightgown that was too big but smelled like lavender and sunshine. Clara collapsed into the bed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of water. She dreamed of sinking. She dreamed of her mother's face, pale and thin, whispering, "I love you." She dreamed of her father standing with his hat in his hands, silent. And she dreamed of Samuel Blackwood pulling her toward the light. When she woke, it was dark outside. A single candle burned on the bedside table, and sitting in a chair beside the bed watching her with those storm-gray eyes was Samuel. "You are awake," he said. Clara sat up slowly. "How long did I sleep?" 10 hours. It is past midnight." She looked around the room at the fine furniture and the warm fire and the clean sheets. "This is real," she said again, as if saying it enough times would make it feel true. "It is real. I am married to you. You are. I do not know you." Samuel stood. He walked to the window, looked out at the dark valley. "You know I pulled you from the water. You know I married you to keep you safe. You know I am honest even when the truth is ugly. What else do you need to know? Why you are really doing this?" Samuel turned to face her. "Because I know what it feels like to watch everyone you trust turn their backs on you, and because nobody deserves to die alone." Clara studied him. The scar on his face, the hard line of his jaw, the way he held himself like a man always ready for a fight. "Your parents," she said. "How did they die?" Samuel's face did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Fire. Someone set our barn on fire while we were sleeping. My father went in to save the horses. My mother went in to save my father. Neither of them came out." Clara's heart clenched. "Samuel, I was 12. I stood in the yard and watched them burn, and not one person in town lifted a finger to help because my father had made enemies, because people were scared, because it was easier to look away. Who set the fire? A man named Victor Kane. He wanted our land. He bought it after they died, paid pennies at auction." Samuel's voice was flat. "5 years later, he fell off a cliff while surveying his property. Tragic, really." Clara understood what he was not saying. "You killed him." "I did not say that. You did not have to." There was a long silence. Then Samuel said, "I learned something that night, Clara. I learned that the world is full of people who will hurt you if they can, and the law will not save you. The only thing that saves you is being strong enough to fight back. Is that what you want from me?" "Strength. I want you to survive. Everything else we can figure out as we go." Clara looked at this man, this stranger who had pulled her from the water and married her to save her life, and was now standing in the shadows of her room, admitting to murder without shame. "I am tired," she said. "I know. Sleep. We can talk more tomorrow." Samuel turned to leave. But Clara called out, "Wait!" He stopped, hand on the door. "Thank you," she said, "for saving me." Samuel looked back at her. His eyes were softer now, less hard. "You saved yourself, Clara. I just gave you a chance to keep fighting." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Clara lay back in the bed staring at the ceiling. She was alive. She was safe. She was married to a man she did not know in a place she had never been. Everything she had known was gone. Her father, her home, her life. But she was alive. And for now, that was enough. The smell of coffee woke her. Clara opened her eyes to find sunlight flooding the unfamiliar room. For a heartbeat, she thought she was still at her father's cabin. Then memory crashed back. The lake, the stones, Samuel's arms pulling her to safety. She sat up, testing her body. Every muscle protested. The rope burns on her wrists had scabbed over during the night. The bruise on her face throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. But she was alive. A knock on the door made her jump. Mrs. Blackwood, Martha's voice called. "You decent." Clara almost laughed at the formality. "Yes." Martha entered carrying a tray with food. Bacon, eggs, biscuits, a pot of coffee. She set it on the bedside table and studied Clara with critical eyes. "You look like death warmed over. I feel like it too. Eat, then come downstairs. Samuel has called a meeting." Clara's stomach growled despite her anxiety. She had not eaten in 2 days. She picked up a biscuit and took a bite. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where we figure out how to keep you alive." Martha paused at the door. "And Clara, whatever happens, do not let these men see you are scared. They respect strength out here. Nothing else." Clara nodded, though her hands were trembling. Martha left. Clara forced herself to eat, though every bite felt like sawdust. Then she dressed in the clothes that had been laid out for her, a simple blue dress that fit better than the borrowed nightgown. She braided her hair, pinched color into her cheeks, and went downstairs. The study was Samuel's private office, a room lined with ledgers and maps. Samuel sat behind his desk. To his right stood Elijah Hayes, the foreman she had met yesterday. To his left was a younger man, maybe 29, with a handsome face and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood," Samuel said, "this is Jedediah Stone. He handles the books for the ranch." The younger man stepped forward and took Clara's hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "A pleasure, Mrs. Blackwood." Samuel is a lucky man. Something about the way he said it made Clara's skin crawl. She pulled her hand back. Thank you, Mr. Stone. Please call me Jed. I would rather not. Jed's smile flickered, but he recovered quickly. Of course. My apologies. Samuel watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Sit down, Clara. We have things to discuss. Clara took the chair he indicated. The men remained standing, arranged around her like guards or captors. Thorne is not going to let this go. Samuel began. He wants that water, and he wants you dead. Right now he is too scared to attack directly. But that will not last. What do you suggest? Clara asked. We need to secure your father's land legally. That means filing the proper claims, getting surveyors to document the aquifer, and making sure the territorial government knows what is at stake. My father will not agree to that. He is terrified of Thorne. Your father does not have a choice anymore. You are married to me. The land is yours by inheritance law, and by extension mine through marriage. Clara's jaw tightened. Is that all I am to you? A deed. The room went silent. Elijah shifted uncomfortably. Jed's smile widened. Samuel met her eyes without flinching. No, but right now the deed is what is going to keep you alive. We can sort out everything else later. What if I do not want to sort it out? What if I just want to disappear? Then Thorne wins. He gets the water, he gets the power, and every family in that valley suffers for it. Samuel leaned forward. You can run, Clara. I will not stop you. But if you stay, if you fight, we can destroy him. We can take everything he has and make him watch while we do it. Clara thought about Reverend Thorne's cold eyes. She thought about his hand striking her face. She thought about his voice calm and sanctimonious, ordering her death. I want to see him lose, she said quietly. I want to see him lose everything. Samuel smiled. It was a cold, hard smile that promised violence. Then we understand each other. The door burst open. One of the ranch hands stumbled in, gasping for breath. Boss riders coming from the east, 10, maybe 15. Samuel was on his feet immediately. Thorne. No, sir. It is Sheriff Rawlings from Laramie. Clara's blood went cold. The sheriff. Thorne must have filed charges, Elijah said grimly. Murder, witchcraft, whatever he could think of. Samuel's face was stone. How far out? 20 minutes, maybe less. Get the men armed. Nobody shoots unless I give the order. Samuel turned to Clara. Go upstairs. Stay in your room. No. Clara. I said no. She stood, her hands balled into fists. I am done hiding. I am done letting other people fight my battles. This is not your battle. It is now. You married me, remember? For better or worse. Samuel stared at her. Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Fine, he said. But you stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. Deal. They walked out onto the porch together, husband and wife, to meet whatever was coming. The riders appeared over the ridge, their badges glinting in the morning sun. Clara counted 12 men, all armed, all looking like they meant business. The lead rider was a big man with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen every kind of trouble the West had to offer. He stopped his horse at the edge of the yard and looked at Samuel. Blackwood, Sheriff Rawlings, I have got a complaint filed against you. Rawlings pulled a paper from his coat. Says you kidnapped a woman, interfered with a lawful religious proceeding, and threatened citizens with deadly force. That is one way to tell it. What is your way? Samuel stepped aside, revealing Clara. This is Clara Brennan. She was being drowned by a mob for the crime of existing. I pulled her out and married her. The only crime committed yesterday was attempted murder, and Reverend Ezekiel Thorne is the one who should be wearing handcuffs. Rawlings looked at Clara. His eyes took in the bruise on her face, the bandages on her wrists. That true miss. They try to drown you. Clara's voice was steady. They tied stones to my ankles and threw me in the lake. My own father watched. The whole town watched. Rawlings was quiet for a long moment. Then he folded the paper and tucked it back in his coat. Seems to me there are two sides to every story, he said slowly. Also seems to me that a woman has got a right to marry whoever she wants. Sheriff, one of his deputies started. Shut up, Jenkins. Rawlings fixed Samuel with a hard stare. "I am not here to arrest nobody, but I am here to warn you. Thorne has got friends. Money has been changing hands in Laramie. People are starting to listen to him. What kind of people? The kind that can make your life very difficult." Rawlings gathered his reins. "Watch your back, Blackwood, and watch your wife." He turned his horse and rode away. His men followed. Clara let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. That could have gone worse. "It will go worse," Samuel replied. "Thorne has just started." The first week passed in a strange blur of new routines and small kindnesses. Clara woke each morning to Martha bringing breakfast. Eggs and bacon and biscuits and coffee, more food than she had eaten in a month back at her father's house. Martha taught her how to cook for 40 men, how to make bread that would last, how to preserve vegetables from the garden. Clara learned that the ranch operated like a small town. There was a blacksmith shop, a smokehouse, a root cellar, chicken coops, and vegetable gardens. 40 men lived in the bunkhouse, most of them cowboys who worked the cattle, a few who handled the horses, and several who did general labor around the property. They stared at Clara when she passed, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. Word had spread about the witch trial, about the drowning, about Samuel's sudden marriage. The men did not know what to make of her. Elijah made it clear. On the third day he gathered all the hands in the yard and spoke in a voice that carried across the open space. "Mrs. Blackwood is the boss's wife. That means she gets the same respect you give him. Anyone who says otherwise can collect their pay and leave. Anyone who causes her trouble will answer to me personally." "Are we clear?" "Yes, sir," 40 voices replied. After that, the stares were more respectful. The men tipped their hats when Clara passed. They said, "Good morning, ma'am." They kept their distance, but they were polite. On the fourth day, Samuel taught Clara to ride a horse. They went out early before the heat of the day, when the air was still cool and sweet. He brought out a gentle mare named Daisy, 6 years old, with a calm temperament. "You need to know how to ride," Samuel said. "If there is danger, you need to be able to get away on your own." Clara approached the horse cautiously. She had been around horses before, but never ridden one. Daisy snorted and tossed her head. "She can smell your fear," Samuel said. "Horses are like people. They know when you are scared. I am not scared. Yes, you are, and that is all right. Fear keeps you careful. But you cannot let it control you." He showed her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to grip with her knees. The first time she tried to climb into the saddle, she fell. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground. "Try again." The second time she made it into the saddle. But the moment Daisy started to walk, Clara panicked and slid off sideways. Samuel caught her again. "How many times will you catch me?" she asked. "As many times as it takes." By the 5th day, Clara could ride 2 miles without falling. By the 7th day, she could trot. Samuel rode beside her on midnight, his black stallion watching her form, correcting her posture, teaching her how to read the horse's movements. "You are a natural," he said. "Or I am just stubborn. That too." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. Clara found herself looking at Samuel differently now. He was patient in a way she had not expected. He did not mock her failures or grow impatient with her mistakes. He simply waited and taught and caught her when she fell. On the evening of the 7th day, Samuel took Clara out behind the barn for shooting lessons. He brought a Colt revolver, a box of ammunition, and a row of tin cans set up on a fence post. "You need to learn to defend yourself," he said. "Thorne is not finished with you." Clara looked at the gun. It was heavier than she expected when he placed it in her hands. "I cannot kill someone," she said. "You do not need to kill. You just need to make them scared enough to run." He showed her how to stand feet shoulder-width apart, body turned slightly to the side. How to hold the gun with both hands, finger outside the trigger, until she was ready to fire. How to aim at the chest, not the head, because the target was larger. Breathe out. Hold it, squeeze, slowly. Clara pulled the trigger. The gun kicked in her hands, the sound exploding across the open field. The bullet went wide, missing the cans by 3 feet. Again. She fired 10 more shots, missed every time. Her hands were shaking, her ears ringing from the noise. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can. Your hands are steady. You are not flinching after the first shot. That means you are getting used to it." Samuel reloaded the gun. "Have you shot before? My father taught me when I was 10, before he started drinking." "Then you remember. Your body remembers. Trust it." Clara raised the gun again, breathed out, held it, squeezed. The bullet struck the edge of a tin can. It spun but did not fall. "Good," Samuel said. "Very good." Clara felt a small surge of pride. She fired again. This time she hit the can dead center. It flew off the fence. "Excellent." They practiced until the sun began to set, until Clara's arms ached and her hands were sore from gripping the gun. But by the end, she was hitting more targets than she missed. As they walked back to the house, Samuel said, "You are not like other women." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Different, how you do not complain. You do not expect things to be easy. You learn fast, and you do not give up. I have lost everything. There is nothing left to lose. Things can only get better." Samuel stopped walking. He looked at her in the fading light, and Clara saw something in his face that had not been there before, something softer. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "I do not feel strong. Strength is not about feeling. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified." They stood there in the twilight looking at each other, and Clara felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of trust. On the 10th night, Clara could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thorn, about her father, about the water beneath her family's land. She got up and went to the window, looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. Movement caught her eye. Someone was leaving the bunkhouse, moving quietly through the shadows. She recognized him, Jedediah Stone. He went to the stable, saddled a horse, and rode away into the darkness. Clara watched him go. It was 2 a.m. Where was he going at this hour? The next night she watched again. Same thing. Jed left at 2, rode toward town, returned before dawn. On the 3rd night, Clara was waiting for him. She stood in the stable with Samuel's revolver in her hand, hidden in the shadows behind a stall. When Jed entered to saddle his horse, she stepped out. "Do not move." Jed froze. His hands went up slowly. "Mrs. Blackwood, I was just going for a ride. At 2 a.m. I could not sleep." Clara pulled back the hammer on the revolver. The click was loud in the quiet stable. "Do not lie to me, Mr. Stone. You have ridden out at 2 a.m. for the past 3 nights. Where are you going?" Jed's smooth facade cracked. "I cannot tell you." Clara aimed at the ground near his feet and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt. Jed jumped back, eyes wide. "I will not ask again." "All right. All right." Jed's voice was frantic. "Reverend Thorn pays me $50 a month to report on the ranch. He wants to know how many men Samuel has, how much money, how many guns. I needed the money. My sister Lily is sick with consumption. She needs medicine. I did not have a choice. You always have a choice." Clara kept the gun steady. "What have you told him? Nothing about you being here?" "I swear. I told him Samuel went on a cattle drive and would not be back for weeks. I have been buying time. Why should I believe you? Because if I wanted you dead, I would have told Thorn where you were days ago." Clara studied him. His fear looked genuine. His hands were shaking, but so were hers. "Here is what is going to happen," she said. "You are going to keep reporting to Thorn, but from now on, you tell him what I want him to know. You work for me now. Do you understand? If Thorn finds out I am lying, he will kill me. If you betray us, Samuel will kill you. Which risk do you prefer?" Jed was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I choose you." "Why?" "Because you are different." Mrs. Blackwood. Catherine Wells, Samuel's former fiancée. She was a spoiled rich girl who did not care about anyone but herself. Thorn is a madman, but you fought your way out of that lake. You are learning to shoot and ride and survive. You are someone worth following. Clara lowered the gun slightly. "Do you know who Thorn works for?" "A judge in Laramie. Harold Ashford. He is the one with real power. Thorn is just his weapon." Clara's heart went cold. A judge. That explained why Rawlings had warned them. Judges controlled courts, marshals, even entire territories. What does Ashford want? The same thing everyone wants. Power. Control. Ashford has been buying up land for years. Ranches, mines, water rights. He is building an empire. Your father's land was just another piece, but you were supposed to die at the lake. You were not supposed to survive. Then I suppose I ruined his plans. Jed actually smiled. You did, and I think that is worth fighting for. Clara made a decision. Tomorrow you ride to Thorne as usual. You tell him Samuel is still away. You tell him the ranch is quiet. You buy us more time. And then what? Then we figure out how to destroy a judge. On the 21st day, a rider approached the ranch. Clara saw him coming from the window, a lone figure on a thin horse moving slowly. She recognized the horse first. It had belonged to her father. She was out the door before Samuel could stop her, running down the porch steps, meeting Tobias Brennan as he dismounted. He looked worse than she remembered. Thinner, grayer, like a man who had not slept or eaten in weeks. Clara. His voice broke on her name. Samuel came up behind her, hand on his gun. You are not welcome here, Brennan. Tobias did not look at Samuel. He looked only at Clara, and there were tears in his eyes. I came to apologize. Clara stood very still. Apologize. For everything. For selling you to Morgan. For the debts. For standing there and watching them throw you in the lake. For being a coward. For being a failure as a father. Samuel started to speak, but Clara held up her hand. Let him talk. Tobias's hands were shaking. He clutched his hat like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Your mother, he said. She would be ashamed of me. I am ashamed of me. I stood there and I watched them hurt you, and I did nothing. I told myself they would not really do it, that Thorne was just trying to scare you. But that is a lie. I knew what they were going to do, and I was too frightened to stop them. Why, Clara's voice was quiet but fierce. Why did you not fight for me? Because I am weak. Because when your mother died, something in me died too. I could not face the world without her, so I drowned myself in whiskey instead. And I let you pay the price for my weakness. He fell to his knees. I am not asking for forgiveness, Clara. I know I do not deserve it. I just needed you to know that I am sorry, that I love you, that I have always loved you, even when I was too broken to show it. Clara looked down at her father, this man who had once carried her on his shoulders, who had taught her to read, who had killed a snake with a shovel to protect her. This man who had stood silent while a mob tried to drown her. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to turn away and never see him again. But she also remembered the way he used to be before grief hollowed him out. She remembered his hands gentle despite their strength. She remembered his laugh. Stand up, she said. Tobias struggled to his feet. Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the broken veins in his nose, the yellow in his eyes, the ruin that alcohol had made of him. I cannot forgive you, she said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. But you are still my father. And I remember the man you used to be before Mother died. The man who protected me. The man who taught me that strength and kindness could live in the same person. Tobias's breath hitched. Can you be that man again? I do not know. But I will try. If you will let me try. Clara looked at Samuel. He was watching her, waiting for her decision. She saw no judgment in his eyes, only patience. She turned back to her father. Do you still have the papers? The contract you signed with Thaddeus Morgan? Yes. In a box under the floorboards at the house. Bring them here, all of them. We need evidence if we are going to fight Ashford. Tobias nodded. I will leave now. I will be back by nightfall. He turned to go, then stopped. Clara, thank you for not turning me away. Do not thank me yet. I am not doing this for you. I am doing this because I need those papers. But she was lying, and they both knew it. She was doing it because he was her father, and some ties could not be completely severed no matter how much they hurt. Tobias rode away. Samuel came to stand beside Clara. You did a brave thing, he said. I did a stupid thing. Maybe. But brave and stupid often look the same. That evening, Tobias returned with a leather satchel full of documents. They spread them across Samuel's desk. Contracts, receipts, letters. Clara's hands trembled as she sorted through them. And then she found it. A contract between Tobias Brennan and Western Holdings, LLC. The terms were clear. Clara would marry Thaddeus Morgan, and in exchange, Tobias's debt would be forgiven. But there was a clause at the bottom written in small print. In the event of Clara Brennan's death prior to marriage, all property shall revert to Serenity Springs Bank, with Western Holdings, LLC granted first right of purchase, and at the bottom, in elegant script, a signature, Harold Ashford. A judge signed this himself, Clara said. He was not even trying to hide it. He did not think anyone would challenge him. Samuel replied, "Judges are used to being untouchable." Elijah leaned over the desk, studying the document. "This is evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. If we can get this to a federal marshal, Ashford could go to prison." If Jed said, "Federal marshals answer to territorial courts, and Ashford controls the courts." "Then we go higher," Clara said. "Washington if we have to." Samuel looked at her with something like admiration. "That could take years. Then we start now." But they did not have years. That night at 3 in the morning the attack came. Clara woke to the sound of gunfire. She jumped out of bed, her heart racing, and ran to the window. Outside, the ranch was chaos. Men on horseback, at least 30 of them, were riding through the yard, torches blazing, firing guns at the bunkhouse and the main house. She heard Thorne's voice amplified by rage. "Blackwood, give us the witch. She belongs to God's justice." Clara grabbed the Colt revolver Samuel had given her and ran downstairs. The main room was already full of men. Samuel was loading a Winchester rifle. Elijah was shouting orders. Martha was there too, surprisingly calm, holding a double-barreled shotgun. Clara Samuel saw her and his face went hard. "Get to the cellar, now." "No, this is not a debate. You are right, it is not." Clara checked her revolver. "I am staying." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. Glass shattered as a bullet came through the window. Everyone ducked. "Positions," Elijah shouted. "Roof, windows, barn." The Blackwood Ranch hands were already moving 40 men against 30, but the attackers had surprise and fire on their side. Clara saw flames leap up from the hay barn. Samuel grabbed her arm. "If you are staying, you stay behind cover, and you do not take chances. Understood?" "Understood." They took position at the windows. Clara's hands were steady as she aimed her revolver. A man on horseback rode close to the porch. She remembered Samuel's lessons. "Breathe out, hold it, squeeze." She fired. The bullet went wide. "Chest, not head," Samuel said calmly, firing his own rifle. He hit a rider who fell from his horse. Clara aimed again. This time she hit the rider's shoulder. He spun in his saddle, crying out, and rode away. Clara's stomach twisted. She had shot someone. She had hurt someone. But they were trying to kill her. They were trying to burn everything Samuel had built. This was not murder. This was survival. The battle lasted 20 minutes. It felt like hours. Bullets chewed through wood and shattered windows. The hay barn burned, lighting up the night sky. 2 of Samuel's men were hit, though neither fatally. 7 of the attackers went down. The rest, seeing they were outgunned, retreated. Thorne was among the last to leave. Clara saw him on his horse at the edge of the yard, his face illuminated by the flames. He was looking at the house, searching. Their eyes met across the distance. Thorne pointed at her. His lips moved. She could not hear the words, but she could read them. "You will burn." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness. Clara lowered her gun. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline draining away. Samuel came to her side. "You did well," he said. "I shot someone. You defended yourself. There is a difference." "Is there?" Samuel took the gun from her hands and set it aside. Then he did something he had never done before. He pulled her into his arms and held her, just held her steady and warm and solid. Clara buried her face in his chest and let herself shake. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. But she let herself be held just for a moment by this man who had become more than a stranger, more than a business arrangement. When she finally pulled back, Samuel was looking at her with something she had not seen before. something that looked almost like fear. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said quietly. "You barely know me. That does not mean I want to watch you die." Before Clara could respond, Elijah came running up the porch steps. "Boss, we have got a problem." Samuel turned. "What is it? Riders approaching from the west. 20, maybe more. They have got torches." Samuel's face hardened. "They are coming back. Get everyone to positions." But this time was different. This time, Thorn had a plan. The second attack came at dawn 3 hours after the first. Samuel had ridden out with 2 men to check on the northern herd, knowing the attackers might return. They never came back. Elijah found their horses wandering near the creek. No bodies, no blood, just hoofprints leading east toward Serenity Springs. Clara felt the world tilt when Elijah told her. They took him, ambushed them in the ravine, at least 10 men, maybe more, where Serenity Springs most likely. Thorn will want to make an example. Clara stood frozen for a moment. Then her mind cleared, where she asked Elijah, "Where exactly the ravine near Widow's Creek?" "About 5 miles out." "How long ago?" "Maybe an hour." They had a good head start. "You are hurt," she said, seeing blood seeping through his shirt. "It is nothing. It is not nothing." She pulled his shirt aside. 3 bullet wounds, 1 deep in his shoulder. "We need to get him to a doctor," Elijah said. "No." Samuel's voice was firm despite his weakness. "We go to Laramie. We finish this. Then I will see a doctor. You stubborn fool. I learned from the best." He looked at Clara and smiled despite the pain. "All of them. Every last one. We ride now." Clara grabbed his arm. "Wait. If we ride in with 40 men, Thorn will kill you before we get close. We need a plan." Samuel looked at her. "What do you suggest?" Clara's mind raced. She thought about Jed, about the information he had been gathering about the weak points in Thorn's operation. "We do not attack head-on," she said. "We go quiet. Small team. Me, Elijah. Jed, 2 others. We get in, get you out, and disappear before they know what happened." "You cannot go," Samuel said. "You are what they want." "Exactly. Which means I am the distraction. While they are focused on me, you escape. That is suicide." "No. That is strategy." Clara met his eyes. "You trusted me enough to marry me. Trust me enough to save you." Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. But if anything goes wrong, you run. Promise me." Clara did not promise. She had no intention of running. Not anymore. They gathered their team, Elijah grim and determined, Jed looking nervous but resolved, 2 of Samuel's best men, both experienced fighters, and Clara wearing men's clothes borrowed from the bunkhouse, her hair tucked under a hat, the Colt revolver heavy at her hip. Martha came to her before they left. She pressed something into Clara's hand, a small silver locket. "This was my daughter's," Martha said. "Rose. I never found her, but I carried this every day hoping. Now you carry it, for luck." Clara opened the locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of a little girl with Martha's eyes. "I will bring it back," Clara promised. "Bring yourself back, child. That is all that matters." They rode out under cover of darkness, following the old mining trail that wound through the mountains. It was dangerous riding at night, the path narrow and treacherous, but it also meant they would not be seen. Jed led the way. He knew Serenity Springs better than any of them knew where the guards would be posted, where Samuel would be held. "The church cellar," Jed said as they rode. "Thorn keeps prisoners there. Stone walls, no windows, 1 door. Easy to guard, hard to break into." "Then we do not break in," Clara said. "We make them open the door. How I walk in the front." Every man turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Elijah said. "It is the only way. They want me. If I surrender, they will bring me to Samuel. Then you attack from outside while we fight from inside. It is too risky." "Everything is risky." Clara's voice was steady. "But this is our best chance." They argued for another 10 minutes, but Clara would not be moved. Finally, Elijah threw up his hands in frustration. "You are as stubborn as your husband," he muttered. They reached Serenity Springs just before dawn. The town was quiet, most people still asleep. But there were guards. Jed had been right. 4 men stationed around the church armed with rifles. Clara dismounted. She took off the hat, let her hair fall down. She holstered her revolver but kept it accessible. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "Then move in." Elijah grabbed her arm. "If you die, Samuel will kill me. Then make sure I do not die." Clara walked toward the church. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. But her steps were steady. Her head was high. One of the guards saw her and raised his rifle. "Stop right there." Clara raised her hands. "My name is Clara Blackwood. Reverend Thorne wants me. Here I am." The guard's eyes widened. He turned and shouted toward the church. "Boss, the witch is here." The church door opened. Thorne stepped out dressed in his black clothes, his Bible in his hand. When he saw Clara, his face split into a terrible smile. The prodigal sinner returns. He walked toward her slowly. "Did you come to confess your sins?" "Child, I came for my husband." "You mean the man who stole you from God's justice? He is being held accountable for his crimes. His only crime was saving an innocent woman." "There are no innocent women." Thorne was close now, close enough that Clara could see the madness burning in his black eyes. "Eve brought sin into the world. Women are vessels of corruption, some more than others. If I am so corrupt, why do you fear me?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I do not fear you. Then why do you need 4 men with rifles just to talk to me?" Thorne's smile faded. "Because you are dangerous. Because you seduce good men into sin. Because you must be cleansed with fire and water until nothing remains but purified ash." He grabbed Clara's arm. His grip was painful. "Take her to the cellar. We will deal with both of them at sunrise." The guards moved forward. Clara did not resist as they tied her hands. She let them lead her into the church down the stone steps into the cellar. The room was cold and damp, lit by a single lantern, and there, chained to the wall, bloody and bruised but alive, was Samuel. His head came up when he heard footsteps. When he saw Clara, his eyes went wide with horror and rage. "No," he said. "Clara, no, you should not have come." "Too bad," Clara replied. "I am here anyway." The guard shoved her forward. She stumbled but did not fall. They chained her to the wall opposite Samuel, close enough to see him but too far to touch. The guards left, slamming the door behind them. Clara heard them lock it, heard their footsteps retreating. As soon as they were gone, Samuel spoke. "Why did you come?" "Because you would have done the same for me. That is different." "Why?" "Because I am a woman. Because you are my wife. And I am supposed to protect you, not the other way around." Clara laughed. It came out bitter. "You keep saying that. I am your wife." "But this was never a real marriage, was it? It was a business arrangement. Protection for water rights." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It stopped being business the moment I pulled you out of that lake." Clara looked at him. His face was swollen from beatings, blood dried at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were clear and honest. "What is it now?" she asked. "I do not know, but it matters. You matter. And if we die here, I need you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made, not because of land or water, because you are the strongest person I have ever met." "Samuel." "I love you, Clara. I did not plan to. I did not want to. But I do." Clara felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the day her mother died. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered, "and I am sorry I got us into this. Do not be sorry. Just promise me something. What if you get a chance to escape? Take it. Do not wait for me." Clara smiled through her tears. "I am not leaving you. We both get out or neither of us does." "Stubborn woman. You married me, remember? You knew what you were getting." They sat in silence for a moment, chained and bleeding, and maybe dying, but somehow together. Then Clara heard it. Footsteps upstairs, shouting, gunfire. "Elijah," she breathed. The door burst open. A guard rushed in, rifle raised, but Jed was right behind him, and he hit the guard over the head with the butt of his own rifle. The man went down hard. Jed grabbed the keys from the guard's belt and rushed to Clara. "Sorry I am late. Had to wait for the right moment." He unlocked her chains, then Samuel's. Samuel stood unsteady but upright. Where are the others? Fighting upstairs. Elijah said to get you out and he would cover us. Then let us not waste his sacrifice. They ran up the stairs. The church was chaos. Elijah and the 2 ranch hands were fighting Thorne's men using the pews for cover, firing methodically. 4 of Thorne's guards were down, but there were still at least 10 more. Samuel grabbed a fallen rifle. Get Clara to the horses, he ordered Jed. I am not leaving, Clara said. She picked up a revolver from one of the downed men and took position beside Samuel. He looked at her, started to argue, then just shook his head. You are going to be the death of me. Not today. They fought side by side, Clara and Samuel, covering each other, reloading, firing. Clara's hands were steady now. She was not afraid. Or maybe she was terrified, but she was doing it anyway, which Samuel had told her was the definition of courage. Thorne appeared at the front of the church. He was holding a torch and his face was twisted with rage. You cannot escape God's judgment, he screamed. He threw the torch. It landed on the wooden pews. Fire spread quickly, hungrily. Time to go, Elijah shouted. They ran for the door. Outside, the sky was lightening with dawn. Their horses were waiting, held by Jed. They mounted and rode the church, burning behind them, Thorne's voice following them even as they disappeared into the trees. They rode hard for an hour before stopping to rest. Everyone was alive, though Elijah had taken a bullet to the shoulder, and Samuel could barely stay on his horse from exhaustion and pain. Clara dismounted and went to Samuel. He slid down from his horse and almost collapsed. She caught him, supported his weight. I have got you, she said. I know. They made camp in a small clearing. Clara tended to Samuel's wounds, cleaning them with water from a stream, bandaging them with strips torn from her shirt. He watched her work, his eyes never leaving her face. When she was finished, he caught her hand. Thank you, he said, for coming for me, for not leaving when I told you to, for being stubborn and brave and impossible. Someone had to save you, Clara replied. You are terrible at saving yourself. Samuel laughed, then winced because it hurt. We make a good team. We do. He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean against him, careful not to press on his injuries. They sat like that as the sun rose, 2 people who had started as strangers and become something more, something neither of them had names for yet, but something real. Elijah came over his shoulder, bandaged. We cannot go back to the ranch, he said. Thorne will send everyone he has after us. Then where do we go? Clara asked. Laramie, Jed said. We take the evidence to the federal marshal. We end this now. Samuel nodded. He is right. We have the contracts. We have Jed's testimony. We have everything we need to bury Ashford. Except one thing, Clara said. We need Ashford to confess. A contract is one thing, but if a judge admits to conspiracy, that is something even his friends cannot cover up. How do we make a judge confess? Elijah asked. Clara thought about it, about Thorne, about fear, about the way powerful men believed they were untouchable. We give him what he wants, she said slowly. We give him me. Every man turned to stare at her. Are you insane? Samuel asked. Maybe, but it will work. Ashford wants me dead because I am the heir to the water. If I walk into his office and offer to sign the land over to him, he will not be able to resist gloating. Men like him, they need to explain how clever they are. We record the conversation, then the marshal arrests him. And if he just kills you on the spot, then you shoot him before he can. This is madness. Clara met Samuel's eyes. It is the only way, and you know it. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but he could not, because she was right. They rode toward Laramie, toward the final confrontation, toward whatever ending waited for them there. That night they made camp in a clearing halfway up the mountain. Samuel's wounds had reopened during the ride. Clara cleaned them again, her hands steady despite her fear. You are good at this, Samuel said, watching her work. I had to learn. No one else was going to take care of me. I will. Clara looked up. What? Take care of you. Samuel's voice was quiet. If you let me. Not because of land or water or any of that, because I want to. Why? Because somewhere between pulling you out of that lake and watching you fight beside me, I stopped seeing you as a business arrangement. I started seeing you as the person I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life." Clara's hands stilled. "Samuel, I love you, Clara. I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I do." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you too, and I am terrified of losing you." "You will not. You do not know that. Then we make sure we both survive. Together." They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful anyway. But they rode together, and that made all the difference. The ride to Laramie took 3 days. 3 days of hard travel through mountain passes and narrow trails, always watching their backs, always listening for the sound of pursuit. Samuel's wounds festered despite Clara's best efforts to keep them clean. By the 2nd day, he was running a fever. By the 3rd, he could barely stay in his saddle. They stopped at a creek to water the horses. Clara helped Samuel down, and he leaned heavily against her, his skin burning hot to the touch. "We need a doctor," she said. "We need to get to Laramie first," Samuel replied, his voice rough. "Once we have Ashford, we can rest. If you die before we get there, none of this matters. I am not going to die. You do not get to decide that." Elijah came over, his own shoulder wound bandaged, but healing better than Samuel's injuries. "There is a doctor in Laramie," he said. "Sarah Mitchell. She is good, and she does not ask too many questions." "Then that is where we go first," Clara said. "Before the marshal, before Ashford, we get Samuel help." "Clara." She turned on him, and there was steel in her voice. "You saved my life when I was drowning. You do not get to throw yours away now because you are too stubborn to see a doctor. We are going. That is not a discussion." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then incredibly he smiled. "Yes, ma'am." They reached Laramie as the sun was setting on the 3rd day. It was a bigger town than Serenity Springs, maybe 5,000 people, with a main street lined with proper buildings made of brick and stone instead of rough timber. There were hotels and saloons, and a courthouse that looked like it belonged in a city back east, with white columns and a clock tower. Jed led them to a small house on the edge of town. A wooden sign hung by the door, "Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Physician." Jed knocked. After a moment, a woman opened the door. She was in her mid-40s, with gray streaking her brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Samuel, who was barely conscious, and stepped back. "Get him inside. Quickly." They carried Samuel into her surgery, a clean room that smelled of carbolic acid and lye soap. Dr. Mitchell worked with efficient hands, cutting away Samuel's shirt, examining the wounds. "These are infected," she said. "Badly. Another day and he would be dead." "Can you save him?" Clara asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Dr. Mitchell looked at her. "Who are you to him, his wife?" "Then pray, Mrs. Blackwood, because medicine can only do so much. The rest is up to him." Dr. Mitchell worked through the night. She cleaned the wounds with alcohol that made Samuel scream even in his delirium. She drained the infection, applied poultices, stitched what needed stitching. Clara stayed by his side the entire time, holding his hand, whispering to him when he thrashed. "You do not get to die," she said. "Do you hear me, Samuel Blackwood? You pulled me out of that lake, and you married me, and you told me you loved me. You do not get to leave me now." Sometime near dawn, Samuel's fever broke. His eyes opened clear for the first time in days. "Clara," he whispered, "I am here. Did you threaten me back to life?" "Yes. That sounds like you." He drifted back to sleep, but this time it was natural sleep, not the fevered unconsciousness of infection. Clara finally allowed herself to breathe. Dr. Mitchell came in with coffee. "He will live," she said. "He is strong, and it seems he has something worth living for." Clara took the coffee gratefully. "Thank you. We do not have much money, but we will pay whatever you ask. You can pay me by staying alive." Dr. Mitchell sat down across from her. "I know who you are, Mrs. Blackwood. Word travels fast in Laramie. They say Judge Ashford wants you dead. They say Reverend Thorne tried to drown you for being a witch. It is all true. Then you should leave Laramie, tonight. Ashford owns this town. If he finds you here, not even your husband's guns can save you." "We are not running." Clara's voice was firm. "We are going to end this. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We are going to bring Ashford down." Dr. Mitchell studied her. "You are either very brave or very foolish. I have been told both are true." The doctor smiled slightly. "I believe it. All right, I will help you. But you need to understand what you are up against. Harold Ashford has been the territorial judge for 15 years. He has friends in Washington, senators who owe him favors, businessmen who profit from his land deals. You are not fighting just one man. You are fighting a system. Then we changed the system." That evening they met with U.S. Marshal Thomas Patterson. His office was on the second floor of the federal building, a sparse room with a desk and filing cabinets and a wanted poster wall covered with faces of desperate men. Patterson himself was in his early 50s with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much but still held on to some kind of hope. He listened as Clara laid out everything: the contracts, the attempted drowning, Thorne's attacks on the ranch, Jed's testimony about spying for money that came from Ashford. When she finished, Patterson sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. "This is serious," he finally said. "If even half of what you are saying is true, Ashford is guilty of conspiracy to commit murder fraud and abuse of power." "It is all true," Clara said. "We have the documents to prove it. Documents can be disputed. Signatures can be forged. What I need is a confession. I need Ashford to admit what he has done in a way that cannot be denied or covered up by his powerful friends." Jed leaned forward. "How do we make a judge confess?" "You do not," Patterson said. "But he might confess to the one person he thinks is beaten, the one person he thinks he has already won against." He looked at Clara. "Me," she said. "You walk into his office. You tell him you are surrendering. You offer to sign over the land rights. And while you are talking, my men and I will be listening from the next room. We record everything he says. Once he admits to the conspiracy, I arrest him. And if he just shoots me instead, then we shoot him first." Patterson's voice was hard. "I will not lie to you, Mrs. Blackwood. This is dangerous. Ashford is a desperate man, and desperate men do terrible things. But it is also our best chance, maybe our only chance." Clara looked at Samuel. He was standing by the window, still weak but upright. His face was set in hard lines. "I do not like this," Samuel said. "Neither do I," Clara replied. "But Marshal Patterson is right. It is the only way. Then I am going with you." "No, you will wait outside with Elijah. If something goes wrong, you come in shooting." Samuel crossed the room and took her hands. His palms were rough, calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "I cannot lose you," he said quietly. "Not after everything. You will not. I promise. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Then I promise to fight. That is something I can control." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was fierce and desperate and full of fear. When they broke apart, Clara was breathless. "Come back to me," Samuel whispered against her hair. "Always." They made their plan. The next morning, Clara would go to Ashford's office in the courthouse. She would be alone, unarmed, looking defeated. Patterson and 2 deputies would be in the adjacent office listening through the wall. Samuel, Elijah, and Jed would be stationed outside, ready to intervene if things went wrong. That night, Clara could not sleep. She lay in the small room Dr. Mitchell had given her, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. About Ashford shooting her before she could get him to talk. About Thorne appearing with his men. About dying in a courthouse instead of a lake, but dying just the same. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in." Samuel entered. He was moving better now, though he still favored his left side where the worst wound had been. He sat on the edge of her bed. "Cannot sleep either?" he asked. "Too many thoughts." "Same." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Samuel said, "Tell me something about your mother." Clara was surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to know where you came from. What made you who you are?" Clara thought about it. She always believed women should be able to take care of themselves. She taught me to read and write and do arithmetic, even though most people thought that was a waste for a girl. She said knowledge was power, and power was freedom. She sounds like she was strong. She was. Until the consumption took her. Clara's voice caught. I watched her die over 6 months. Every day a little weaker, a little thinner. And my father watched too, but instead of getting stronger to take care of me, he fell apart. I think he loved her so much that he did not know how to live without her. Is that why you forgave him? Because you understand, I have not forgiven him. Not really. But I understand that grief can break a person. And maybe, if we survive this, he can find a way to put himself back together. Samuel reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You have a kind heart, Clara Blackwood. Under all that strength and stubbornness, you are kind. Kind women do not shoot people. Kind women do what they have to do to survive. That does not make you less kind. It makes you real. Clara looked at him. This man who had been a stranger a month ago and was now the most important person in her world. This man who had saved her life and then let her save his. Stay with me tonight, she said. Just stay. I do not want to be alone. Samuel kicked off his boots and lay down beside her on the narrow bed. Clara curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He wrapped his arms around her and held her like she was something precious. They did not make love. They were both too injured, too exhausted, too aware that tomorrow might be their last day. But they held each other, and that was enough. That was everything. Clara woke before dawn. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple dress that made her look smaller, more helpless. She braided her hair. She did not wear the gun. Martha had given her the locket with Rose's picture. Clara fastened it around her neck, for luck. Samuel was waiting downstairs. He looked at her and his jaw tightened. You look like you are going to surrender. That is the idea. I hate this plan. I know. Patterson arrived with his deputies. They went over the plan one more time. Clara would go in at 9 o'clock when the courthouse opened. She would ask to see Judge Ashford. Patterson would already be in the adjacent office with a deputy who knew stenography, someone who could write down every word. If Ashford confesses, I will come through that door and arrest him myself, Patterson said. If he tries to hurt you, my men outside will intervene. But you have to keep him talking long enough for us to get what we need. How long? 5 minutes. 10 if you can. Clara nodded. I can do that. They walked to the courthouse together. It was a beautiful morning, the kind that made you believe the world was a good place. Birds sang in the trees. Children played in the street. A woman swept her porch and called good morning to her neighbor. Clara thought about how strange it was that the world kept turning even when your own world was about to end. At the courthouse steps, Samuel caught her hand. If you die in there, he said, I will burn this whole town to the ground. Then I had better not die. She kissed him once quick and hard, and then she walked up the steps and through the big wooden doors and into the courthouse alone. The interior was cool and dim with high ceilings and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. A clerk sat at a desk near the entrance. Clara approached him. I need to see Judge Ashford, she said. My name is Clara Blackwood. He will want to speak with me. The clerk's eyes widened. He recognized the name. Yes, ma'am, right away. He disappeared down a hallway. Clara waited, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the building must be able to hear it. She thought about running, about turning around and walking back out those doors and disappearing into the mountains with Samuel and never looking back. But she did not, because if she ran now, Ashford would win. He would take her land, take the water, and he would do the same thing to the next family and the next until someone finally stopped him. It might as well be her. The clerk returned. Judge Ashford will see you now. Follow me. They went up a grand staircase to the second floor. The clerk led her to a heavy oak door with brass fittings. He knocked once, then opened it. Mrs. Blackwood, Your Honor. Clara stepped inside. The office was large and richly appointed. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound law books. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, polished mahogany that probably cost more than her father's entire house. Behind the desk sat Judge Harold Ashford. He was 68 years old with white hair and a face like carved granite. He wore an expensive suit black with a gold watch chain across his vest. His eyes were pale blue and cold as winter ice. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said. His voice was cultured, educated, the voice of a man who had attended Eastern universities and dined with senators. What an unexpected pleasure. Clara forced herself to walk forward, to stand before his desk like a supplicant, to keep her hands folded in front of her so he would not see them shaking. "I came to surrender," she said. Her voice was soft, defeated. "I cannot fight anymore. I cannot watch more people die. I want this to end." Ashford leaned back in his chair. He was smiling. "Surrender? How very practical of you. And what exactly are you surrendering the land?" "The water rights." "Everything." Clara kept her eyes down, playing the role of a broken woman. "I will sign whatever you want. Just promise me that my husband will be allowed to live, that you will leave him alone." "Your husband," Ashford repeated. "The cowboy who interfered with a lawful proceeding. The man who harbored a fugitive from justice. I am not a fugitive. They tried to murder me. Murder is such an ugly word." Ashford stood and walked around his desk. He was tall, imposing, the kind of man who was used to being obeyed. "I prefer to think of it as pest control, removing obstacles to progress." Clara looked up at him. Her heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "You killed Thaddeus Morgan. You planned it all. Not personally." Ashford's smile widened. "But yes, I arranged for Morgan's death. The man was useful for a time, but he was also greedy. He wanted too much money for the land, and more importantly, if you married him, the property would have been protected by marriage law. I needed you dead before the wedding." A tragic drowning seemed appropriate. He was admitting it, right there, casual as discussing the weather. Clara felt sick, but she pressed on. "And the drought. Did you cause that too?" Ashford laughed. "I wish I had that much power." "No, the drought was an act of God, but it was very convenient. People looking for someone to blame, a fire and brimstone preacher showing up at just the right moment. I simply provided Thorne with financial support and a target. He did the rest. You used him. I used everyone. That is what power is, Mrs. Blackwood, the ability to use people to get what you want." Ashford walked closer. "Your father was easy, a drunk with debts. Morgan was easy, a greedy man with a weak heart. Even you were supposed to be easy, a frightened girl with no protector. But then Samuel came." Ashford's smile faded slightly. "Yes, the cowboy. That was unfortunate. I underestimated his attachment to you. I thought he would take his loss and move on, but apparently he developed feelings. How tedious. He loves me. Love makes people do stupid things, like attacking Reverend Thorne's men, like riding to Laramie with half-healed wounds to play the hero." Ashford shook his head. "Your husband is going to get you both killed, Mrs. Blackwood. But I am a reasonable man. Sign the papers and I will let him live. I will even pay him fair value for his trouble. Say $500. Clara looked at him, at this man who had orchestrated so much death and suffering because he wanted water, because he wanted power. Why, she asked. "Why do you need so much? You already have money, influence, respect." For a moment, something flickered across Ashford's face, something that might have been pain. "My son," he said quietly. "James. He died when he was 10 years old, 1868. The drought year. We had no water, nothing to drink. He died of thirst in my arms, begging me to save him. And I could not, because I did not control the water." Ashford's voice hardened. "I swore that day that I would never be helpless again, that I would control every drop of water in this territory, that no one would ever die like my son died." Clara felt a flicker of sympathy. "Then it died. Your son's death was a tragedy. But using it to justify murder, that is just revenge dressed up as justice. It is survival of the fittest. 47 families lost their land because they were weak. Thousands more will have water because I am strong. That is the mathematics of power, Mrs. Blackwood. The few die so the many can live. You are not God. You do not get to decide who lives and dies." Ashford's smile returned colder than before. "But I do. That is exactly what judges do. We decide. And I have decided that you will sign these papers or your husband dies within the hour." He pulled a document from his desk drawer and set it in front of Clara. "A quit-claim deed transferring all rights to the Brennan property to Western Holdings, LLC. Sign." Clara looked at the paper. Then she looked at Ashford. "No." The word hung in the air between them. Ashford's face went red. "Excuse me," I said no. "I will not sign. I will not give you what you want." And every word you just said was heard by U.S. Marshal Patterson, who is standing in the next room with 2 deputies and a stenographer who wrote down your entire confession. Ashford's eyes widened. For the first time he looked uncertain. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" The door burst open. Marshal Patterson came through with his gun drawn, 2 deputies behind him. "Harold Ashford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, corruption of public office, and abuse of power." Ashford's face went from red to white. "You cannot arrest me. I am a territorial judge. I have immunity. Not for this." Patterson pulled out handcuffs. "Not when you confess to multiple murders in front of a witness and a federal marshal. Your friends in Washington cannot save you from this." Ashford looked at Clara. There was hate in his eyes now, pure and undiluted. "You," he spat, "you think you have won? I will have you killed. I will burn everything you love. I will—" He reached for something in his desk drawer. A gun. Patterson fired. The bullet struck Ashford's hand, and the judge screamed, dropping the derringer he had been reaching for. "Add attempted murder of a federal witness to those charges," Patterson said calmly. "Deputies, get him out of my sight." They dragged Ashford away, still screaming threats. Clara stood there shaking as the adrenaline drained out of her body. She had done it. She had gotten him to confess. She had won. The door burst open again. Samuel came through, Elijah and Jed behind him. Samuel crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Clara into his arms. "You are alive," he said. "Thank God you are alive. I told you I would be. You are the bravest, most terrifying woman I have ever met." Clara laughed. It came out a little hysterical. "Is that a compliment?" "Yes." Patterson came over. "Mrs. Blackwood, you did well." "Very well. We have enough to convict Ashford 10 times over. What happens now? Now he goes to trial. Federal court. He will spend the rest of his life in prison." And Thorne Patterson's face darkened. "Reverend Thorne disappeared after the church fire. We are searching for him, but so far nothing. If he is smart, he has left the territory. And if he is not smart, then you need to stay vigilant. Men like Thorne do not give up easily." But that concern was for later. For now, Clara let herself be held by Samuel, let herself feel safe, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had actually won. They stayed in Laramie for 2 weeks while the legal proceedings unfolded. Ashford was formally charged and held without bail. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession was airtight. 12 of his associates were arrested, including several corrupt sheriffs and a territorial senator who had taken bribes. The newspapers called it the biggest corruption scandal in Wyoming history. They ran stories about the 47 families who had lost their land, about the murders and intimidation and fraud. They called Clara the woman who brought down a judge and Samuel the cowboy who married a witch to save her life. The attention was uncomfortable. Clara had never wanted to be famous. She just wanted to live. On the morning of the 14th day, they received word. Tobias Brennan was dead. He had been found in his cabin, a bottle of whiskey beside him, and a gunshot wound to the head. The doctor said it was suicide. The note said he could not live with what he had done, with his cowardice, with failing his daughter. But Clara knew better. The gunshot had come from behind. Someone had murdered him and made it look like suicide. Thorne Samuel said when he heard, "It has to be." "Why kill him now?" Elijah asked. "Because Tobias was a loose end. Because Thorne is tying up everything that could connect him to Ashford." Jed looked grim. "We need to leave Laramie. Now." But Clara did not want to run. She wanted to bury her father properly, to say the words she had not been able to say when he was alive. So they rode back to Serenity Springs, all of them together, armed and ready. The town was different now, quieter. Many families had left unable to bear the shame of what they had done. Those who remained would not meet Clara's eyes. They buried Tobias on a hill overlooking his property, the property with the water beneath it. Clara stood at the graveside while a circuit preacher said words about forgiveness and redemption and peace. When it was over, everyone else left. But Clara stayed. Samuel stood beside her silent, letting her have this moment. "I forgive you," Clara said to the grave. "I know you tried at the end. I know you loved me. I am sorry I could not save you." She placed wildflowers on the fresh earth, lavender because it had been her mother's favorite. Then she turned away and did not look back. They had been at the grave for 10 minutes when Clara felt it. The prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. She glanced at Samuel. He felt it too. His hand moved slowly toward his gun. Clara scanned the hillside. Nothing moved. But she knew. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting. "Thorn," she whispered. Samuel nodded grimly. "He never left. He has been waiting for us to come back." Then a shot rang out. As they were leaving the graveyard, a shot rang out. The bullet missed Clara by inches, striking the wooden fence beside her. Samuel threw her to the ground, covering her body with his. More shots. Elijah returned fire. Jed dove behind a gravestone. There Samuel shouted, pointing. On the hill above the graveyard, a figure in black stood outlined against the sky. Reverend Ezekiel Thorn. He was holding a rifle and his face was twisted with rage. "Witch!" he screamed. "You will burn! You will all burn!" He fired again. The bullet struck the ground near Samuel's head. Samuel rolled off Clara and drew his Colt. But before he could fire, another shot rang out from a different direction. Thorn staggered. He looked down at his chest where blood was blooming across his black coat. He looked up confused, and then he fell. From behind a mausoleum, Tobias Brennan's old friend, a man named Jacob, who had been too drunk at the trial to stop it, but was sober now, lowered his hunting rifle. For Tobias, Jacob said quietly, "And for his daughter." They ran to where Thorn had fallen. He was still alive, but barely. Blood bubbled at his lips. His eyes found Clara's face. "Sarah," he whispered. "My Sarah, I am sorry. I tried to save them all. I tried." Then his eyes went empty. Clara stood over the body of the man who had tried to kill her twice, the man who had been driven mad by grief and twisted it into something monstrous. She should have felt triumph, but all she felt was tired. "It is over," Samuel said, taking her hand. "Is it?" "Yes. Ashford is in prison. Thorn is dead. The land is yours. It is over." Clara looked around at Serenity Springs, this town that had tried to murder her, and she made a decision. "I am never coming back here," she said. "This place is dead to me." Then we go home, to the ranch, to our life. Our life. Clara liked the sound of that. They rode away from Serenity Springs for the last time. Behind them, Jacob and a few other men who had finally found their courage buried Ezekiel Thorn in an unmarked grave. No one prayed over him. No one mourned. He simply disappeared like he had never existed at all. 25 years later, in the spring of 1903, Clara Blackwood stood on the porch of the Blackwood Ranch and watched her grandchildren play in the yard. She was 51 years old now, with silver threading through her hair and lines around her eyes from a lifetime of smiling. Her hands were rough from work, but strong. She wore a simple dress and boots and a silver locket that had belonged to a woman named Martha, who had died of old age 8 years ago, peaceful and surrounded by family. Beside her stood Samuel. He was 60 years old, his beard gone completely gray, but his eyes were still sharp and his hands were still steady. He still wore his father's Stetson hat. He still rose at 4:30 every morning to check the cattle. They had been married for 25 years. It still did not feel like enough time. Their daughter Hope came riding up the path 24 years old, and so much like Clara, it sometimes hurt to look at her. She was followed by their son Thomas, 22, who had just finished law school and was about to start working as a prosecutor. And behind them was Mary, 19, who had graduated from medical school the month before and would be opening a clinic in Laramie. 3 children, 3 miracles, 3 reasons Clara woke up grateful every morning. Mama Hope called, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had been riding since she was 3. There is news from Washington. The Water Rights Protection Act passed. It is law now. Clara's breath caught. They had been fighting for this law for 10 years, legislation that would prevent any single person or company from monopolizing water sources. It had been their life's work, hers and Samuel's, to make sure what Ashford had tried to do could never happen again. "We won," she said quietly. "You won," Samuel corrected, putting his arm around her waist. "This was your fight. I just helped. We won together. Nothing we have ever done has been alone." That evening the whole family rode to the hill where Tobias Brennan was buried. They had moved his body to the Blackwood property years ago, had given him a proper gravestone and a place among people who loved him. The stone read Tobias Brennan, 1826 to 1878, father and protector who found his courage at the end. Beside his grave was another, Mary Brennan, Clara's mother. Her body moved from the Serenity Springs Cemetery. And beside hers were 2 more, Elijah Hayes and Martha Hayes, who had lived to see all 3 of Clara's children born and had died within months of each other, the way people do when they cannot bear to be separated. Clara placed flowers on each grave. Wildflowers because Martha had loved them, lavender because her mother had loved it, and for her father a sprig of sage because he had once told her it meant strength. "I wish you could see them," Papa Clara said quietly. "Hope is so brave, Thomas is so smart, and Mary is going to save lives. You would have been proud." Samuel squeezed her hand. "He is proud. Wherever he is, he knows what you have built." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The valley was green and lush, irrigated by the water that had almost cost Clara her life. The water that was now shared by every farm and ranch in the region, protected by law, free from the control of any single person. That night Clara and Samuel sat on the porch watching the stars come out. They had done this 1,000 times, and Clara never got tired of it. The peace of the evening, the sound of the river, the knowledge that they were safe. "Do you ever think about that day?" Samuel asked. "At the lake every day of my life. Regrets?" "Not one." Clara leaned against him. "You pulled me out of the water and everything changed. I got to live. I got to fight. I got to love you. I got to have children and grandchildren and make a difference. What could I possibly regret? I regret that I did not kill Ashford myself." Clara laughed. "You would have regretted that more. Prison was worse for him than death. He died alone in a cell, unmourned and forgotten. That was the right ending." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "You are a wise woman, Clara Blackwood. I am a lucky woman. Lucky that a stubborn cowboy decided to marry me. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had started as strangers bound by necessity and become partners, lovers, friends. 2 people who had faced death and corruption and hatred and had come through it together. Inside the house, Clara could hear her children laughing. Hope was telling a story about training a difficult horse. Thomas was arguing some legal point. Mary was describing a new surgical technique she had learned. The sound of family, the sound of life continuing. Tomorrow Clara would wake early and check on the cattle. She would ride out to the eastern pasture where they were planning to dig a new well shared by 3 neighboring ranches. She would write letters to senators about water conservation and land rights. She would teach her granddaughter how to shoot the way Samuel had taught her. But tonight she would sit on this porch with her husband and watch the stars and remember the girl who had sunk into Dead Man's Lake expecting to die. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that survival was not enough. You had to fight. You had to stand up. You had to refuse to let the world make you small. "They called me a witch," Clara said softly. Samuel smiled. They were half right. You cast a spell on this whole valley. made it better. It was not magic. It was just refusing to quit. Same thing sometimes. Clara thought about that. About Tobias, who had quit and lost everything. About Thorne, who had turned his grief into hatred. About Ashford, who had tried to control everything and ended up with nothing. And about Samuel, who had jumped into a lake for a stranger and gained a family. "Tell me something," Clara said. "That day at the lake. Why did you really come?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I remembered what it was like to watch my parents die while everyone stood by. Because I swore I would never be that person, the one who looks away. Because I saw you sinking and I thought, not today, not while I am here. So you saved me. We saved each other. You gave me a reason to care again, to risk again, to love again. I had been dead for 22 years, Clara. You brought me back to life." Clara turned to look at him. At this man with gray in his beard and scars on his hands and eyes that still saw her as clearly as they had that first day. This man who had become her whole world. "I love you, Samuel Blackwood. I love you too, Clara Blackwood. Until the day I die and every day after." They kissed slow and sweet, two people who had earned every moment of happiness they had. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The river sang its endless song. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. And on the porch of the Blackwood Ranch, Clara and Samuel sat together, watching the night, grateful for every breath, every heartbeat, every precious second of life. Because they had both learned the same lesson the hard way. Some people are thrown into the water to drown. Some people are pulled out and given another chance. And some people, the lucky ones, spend the rest of their lives making sure no one drowns alone ever again. Clara had been called a witch, but she had become something more. A fighter, a wife, a mother, a force for change. And her story, the story that began with a drowning and a cowboy and a marriage born of necessity, had become legend. It was told around campfires and written in history books and passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. The story of Clara Brennan, who sank into Dead Man's Lake to die and rose from it to live. The story of Samuel Blackwood, the cowboy who said, "She is my wife," and meant it with his whole heart. The story of how two strangers became partners, then lovers, then legends, and how in the end love was stronger than hate, courage was stronger than fear, and hope was stronger than anything the world could throw at them. The stars shone down on the Blackwood Ranch. The river flowed carrying life to the valley. And Clara and Samuel sat together on their porch, two people who had fought for everything and won. They had won.